Debra Fileta, such a pleasure to have you back on Undistracted. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And I really am so grateful that you've come back because chatting with you, I feel like you're somebody who just takes us into the important, good stuff to talk about, which today is going to center around the ideas in your new book, Reset, which is something that offers help to people who feel like they need to change something in life, which might be all of us. But how do
Right.
you know if you're ready for a reset, if it is time for you to make some changes in your life?
I think the bottom line is the question, is there something in your life that you want to change? Is there something that keeps coming up again and again that you really want to take the time to heal? And I find it interesting because around this time of year, usually all of our New Year's resolutions have kind of failed. They've bombed. We've put them on the back burner. And I think it's because oftentimes we try to make changes from the outside in
Mm.
rather than pursue real healing from the inside out.
And in that, the way that we need to change, we address the inner noise and the outer noise, as you put it. Why is that? Why is addressing both of those, I suppose, important?
We live in a culture where we're surrounded by noise and distraction and things that are just competing for our attention. And I think we can get so focused on the outward work that we
Mm.
forget to do the inward work. We forget to look in. And there's noise on the outside, but there's also noise on the inside. There's noise of our negative thinking. There's noise of the critical thoughts that we have throughout the day, or the worst case scenarios, or all of those internal things that are happening. So, in order for us to really begin to heal, one of the very first steps I guide you in reset is essentially 31 practices to help you heal from the inside out. And what people find a little bit interesting is that the very first practice is to pause. It's like,
Mm.
wait. I thought we were ready to go. Ready, set, let's do this. And I'm telling you to pause. But it's because if we don't take the time to pull back and pause and to listen to what God is doing, to listen to where we're headed and where we want to be and what's going on inside of us and where we need to heal, the noise is just going to keep us stuck. So it's a really important practice for us to pause and have an idea of where we're going.
And it's no small thing to change your life. I feel like that's maybe what a lot of people confront is that as exciting as it is to set New Year's resolutions or to kind of go gung ho into an idea of what you want your life to look like, you got to lay a little bit of groundwork and do some preparation to change.
Exactly. Because when we try to just change from the outside in, it doesn't work. I had this car in college that was so annoying. It gave me so much grief. It was just constantly breaking down in the weirdest ways. I remember I was driving to finals one morning. I was running a little bit late. I ran to my car, opened the car, tried to get to my final exams. It was really cold outside. Next thing you know, my windows roll down and my alarm starts to blare. My windshield wipers are wiping without my permission. So I'm driving to finals in the freezing cold with my windows down and my alarm blaring. The problem is, I could have easily tried to fix that car. I could have duct taped the windows. I could have
Mm.
muffled the alarm. But if I didn't get to the roots of what was really wrong, I'm just doing the superficial work. I'm not actually changing anything. And I think oftentimes we address the work in our own life in a superficial way. We try to put band aids on it. We try to come up with plans that are so focused on the external and exterior without taking time to do any internal work.
Mm.
And if we do it that way, we're guaranteed to fail because it's not the power of your will, it's the power of your practices, and those practices are things that have to start from the inside out.
Yeah, that is such good advice. Not the power of your will, the power of your practices. And I would just want us to realize that because it is so crucial. And I feel like for a lot of people, they're going to go, okay, so how do I do this internal work? How do I get to the root of what's causing me distress or causing me to be living in destructive patterns? Where do we start?
Well, I tried to map it out as easy as possible in these 31 practices, but as you'll notice going through these practices one by one, is that in each one we kind of peel back another layer to help you get to the root. And the very first place that we have to begin is with our thoughts. because counseling and psychology will tell you that thoughts lead to feelings and then feelings lead to behavior. Oftentimes we don't realize why am I doing this? Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep defaulting into this addiction or these bad relationships or this unhealthy habit in my life? But it's not just about the behavior, it's about the feeling that came before that behavior. And then, even before that, there's a set of beliefs and thoughts that are prerequisites for how you feel, which
Mm.
then affect how you behave. So, this is kind of the work of peeling back the layers. And I really believe a huge portion of it begins with our thought life and our underlying beliefs about life.
And addressing those, I think, can be difficult sometimes because, say, for instance, if I was coming into the world with this belief that I'm unloved, that nobody likes me, that I'm unattractive, etc., whatever it is, how do I know that's not true? How do I come to a place where I go, hang on a minute, I don't think these thoughts are accurate. These thoughts aren't helping me.
Well, I think what you have to realize is, how are these thoughts impacting my behavior? So, those negative thoughts are not going to inspire you to do good things. If you're feeling insecure, if you're feeling unloved, if you're feeling not good enough, that's going to affect your behavior. You're going to stay home more often. You're not going to take risks in relationships. You're going to hold back. You're going to be feeling all these insecurities that then come out in how you live your life. So, negative thoughts tend to lead to a negative way of living. And I think that's where you have to look around your life. If there's an area in your life where you're struggling, there's a good chance when you trace it back, you're going to find there is some negative thought process
Mm,
that's affecting how you live your life. So, one of the ways to take inventory is just by looking around, like, where are the areas of my life where there's the most struggle right now? Where are the areas where there's the most stress? Where are the areas where I am getting stuck again and again and again? What do I really believe about myself? What do I really believe about others? What do I really believe about God? I think
mm,
one thing we recognize is that most of the time, our unhealthy thoughts are actually rooted in our trauma rather than in truth. They're not rooted in truth. They're rooted in our traumatic experiences from childhood, the hurts and wounds we've been through, the hardships that we've experienced, the negative things people have done or said about us. And we hold on to those things rather than rooting our thoughts in truth.
mm.
This is an elaborate process. It's not as complicated as it sounds, though. What it
Yeah.
takes, though, is for us to be aware and to kind of open our eyes to our thought processes.
And it takes a level of awareness, I think. In listening to you, kind of what I'm hearing is that our behavior, our feelings of maybe despondency, like they give us a clue as to where we need to direct our focus for healing, for correction.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way I put it is that triggers are a sign that there's more healing to be received. We live in a trigger avoidant culture, don't we? If something
Mm,
triggers
yeah.
you, you just run from it. If a book triggers you, you stop reading it. If a church sermon triggers you, you stop going to that church. If somebody says something that triggers you, you cut that relationship off. We want to avoid triggers at all cost. But I challenge you to consider that trigger as a spotlight. It is shining the light on an area of your life where you are ready for more healing. It's a
Mm,
sign that there's more healing to be received in that area. Maybe it's not just about the thing that triggered you. Maybe it's the question of, why is this triggering me? What hurt is underneath the surface here that I need to deal with? What wounds is this pushing on in my life, and have I faced them and healed from them in a healthy way?
mm. And I really appreciate what I think is a really positive look at triggers, right? You see them and you go, awesome, there's deeper work to be done. There's
Yeah,
more healing ahead of me. Whereas I think, as you've said, in our avoidant culture, people would go, there's a trigger, crap, I'm failing. Something's
right.
broken about me. Whereas it can be something insightful.
Exactly. I think it's empowering, instead of being like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I heal? No, this is an invitation to an even deeper level of healing. You're
Mm,
entrusted with is an invitation to heal on an even deeper level. And I truly believe it's God saying, you are ready for deeper healing. The
mm.
question is, are you willing? Are you willing to come and do the work?
Yeah, and I think as people try to answer that, one of the things they're going to have to work out is, well, if I want to be ready, am I okay with going into my emotions? Am I okay with feeling things that might be uncomfortable? Because we can so easily avoid that as well. Why do you think we have such a fear of emotion and a fear of our feelings sometimes?
I think most of us have never learned how to handle emotions. If anything, we come from a culture where we kind of suppress emotions, especially our generation. We come from a generation where we've kind of been told, you know, don't cry about it.
Mm,
You just suck up those feelings, don't show emotions. Even the phrase, don't cry about it, or I'll give you something to cry about. Like,
yeah.
these are the type of things that we have heard over the years where we think it's wrong or weak to show emotions. In the middle of therapy, I often have clients who start crying and then they apologize. I'm so
Mhm.
sorry. Like, why are you apologizing? There's nothing wrong with that emotion. It's a beautiful thing. It's evidence of the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think people are uncomfortable because it's a muscle that we haven't flexed. And then in other spaces, for some people, emotions are usually felt when they've gone through difficult things. And so all they know is the hard stuff and they just want to avoid it altogether. But if you
Mm,
avoid feeling the hard, you're also avoiding your ability to feel the good. If you're just numbing emotions altogether, you're numbing all of them. And
yeah.
so the depth to which we're able to feel the hard things is also the depth to which we'll be able to feel the good things. Emotions are a signal. They're not bad or good in of themselves. They're a signal. They signal what we need. They signal what's going on inside of us, and they clue us into what's happening underneath the surface.
Yeah. It's like you're muting your humanity in a way by not feeling anything.
Yes. And some people mute it subconsciously, unconsciously, because they've been through trauma. A lot of times people who have been through trauma find that their emotions are kind of muted because maybe that's the way their body survived that hard thing. But
Mm.
years later, that same coping mechanism is now sabotaging their life. And so we have to learn to go back and heal from some of those hard places and be able to feel free to feel so that we can live life abundantly.
And I think there's probably a mindset some people will, I imagine, need to address where that sense of being able to not necessarily bury emotion, but at least not acknowledge it is kind of connected to resilience, right? Like I've gotten over it. This emotion is not at the forefront of everything. So therefore, I'm kind of healthy because I'm pushing through. That sounds like it would be inaccurate then.
Well, here's the thing about emotions. Even emotions, there has to be a balance, right? So when we talk about emotions, it's important to see emotions as a signal and recognize, what are my emotions signaling to me? Is this
Mm,
accurate? Is this healthy? What is it saying I need to change or heal from or address or focus on? But there are times when our emotions aren't always telling us the truth. So emotions are real and they're important and they're signals, but they're not always true. Sometimes
mm,
they false alarm from things from our past, from trauma history. And so, as important as it is to be in tune to them, it's also important to question them, to make sure that they are not just leading us, but we are leading them. And we're allowing ourselves to lead our emotions into healthy areas and healthy territories.
mm. That backbone of truth and finding it, is that something that for you is anchored in faith, right? Like if we talk about a feeling of I'm not worth it or, I'm not valuable, is the truth that you come back to the truth that, God loves each of us? Each of us, He's given a plan and a purpose for our life. Or is there something else that you bring that correction to?
For me personally, it always goes back to God's truth because that's the one thing that I know to be unchanging. My truth changes based on how I feel, based on what other people say, based on my mood, based on my hormones, based on all
Yeah.
kinds of things. But I know God's truth is unchanging. So it's not just about me like waking up and saying positive statements to myself. It is
Mm,
deeper than that. It is about uprooting the lies, recognizing them, calling them out, being in tune to them on a day to day basis so that I can replace them with God's truth and anchor everything that I'm thinking and feeling in the truth of who God says, in the truth of God's promises, in the truth of who God says He is and who He says I am. And
mm.
so that is a huge part of the process of rooting my thoughts in truth rather than rooting them in trauma.
When we're correcting those thoughts, is the trigger, do you think, for the areas where they're a little off kilter, is it always from childhood? Like, is everything always our parents' fault, or are there other things that can feed into some of these challenges, these traumas that each of us may be carrying in life?
Well, let me put it this way. I would never use the phrase that it's our parents' fault, but I would say that our childhood development has a huge impact on who we are today. But not just our childhood development, our past. It could be a bad relationship you had with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It could be the peers that you interacted with in high school or college that brought you down and bullied you and just abused you to pieces. Even
Mm.
peer abuse is a real thing. It could be the failures that you've had in life. It could be the rejection that you faced. No matter what, there's a buildup of experiences, and how we interpret those experiences shapes our reaction and our feelings to those experiences. And so I do think a big part of it is in our childhood development, but I also think there's other layers over the years. We're not just made up of our childhood, but
Mm.
we are made up of a series of different experiences that we've gone through and how we interpret those experiences.
And then I guess the self awareness that we have, hopefully, as adults, allows us to do the work more effectively of addressing some of this stuff, which you anchor in this concept of the ABCs of therapy. Can you talk us through what they are?
Yeah. So the ABCs are the different things that happen that kind of trigger us. So A would be the activating event. There's usually something that happens. So as we're talking about childhood, we're talking about peer experiences, rejection, what is the event, the activating event that happened? And then the next thing, B, is what's your belief about the event? When that thing happened, what did you start believing about yourself, about the situation? Maybe a friend, maybe the activating event is you see on Instagram that a friend had this party and you weren't invited. Now you're
Mm.
feeling activated. That activated you. Well, what's the belief that comes from that? Well, the belief could be they don't like me. They didn't want me there. But the belief could also be, maybe they just forgot to invite me, or maybe something was going on, or maybe I missed the invitation and it's actually sitting in my spam inbox. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many ways we could believe, but what you believe then triggers the consequence, which is C. C is how I begin to feel and act as a response. And if B is off, guess what? C is also going to be off. If B is unhealthy, C will also be unhealthy. And so these are the ABCs. And in Reset, I talk about let's add a D to that. ABCD. Let's begin to do it differently. We usually have an ABC pattern that we tend to default to over and over again, the same kind of negative, faulty beliefs. But what if we began to do it differently? What if we began to stop and look at B and try to reinterpret it and look at it through a different lens? What could that do if we began to change our thoughts, which then it began to impact our feelings, which then began to impact our behaviors? Can you imagine
Mm.
how that would affect our personal life, our families, our ministries, our jobs, the world? So this is some real important work, but it's not just work for
Yeah.
us. It's work that influences everybody around us as well.
Yeah, I love the way you put it that healthy individuals make for healthy relationships. And that's not just romantic relationships, that's all the areas, all the relationships of our lives that are affected by each of us personally saying, I want to do this, I can do this, I'm going to prepare and make the necessary changes.
Right, exactly. Because when you get healthy, you begin to react and respond to relationships in a healthy way.
Mm.
And I think oftentimes we want to focus on everybody else and what the work that they need to do. But I
Yeah.
think it's more empowering to say, I am the one that has the power and control to shift what
Mm.
I do. And when I do that, I can begin to influence the people around me.
And I want to ask you about the concepts of, self sabotage, self fulfilling prophecies, because as exciting as it is to imagine these healthier lives we could each be living, I know there's going to be moments, some of us may be more predisposed to this than others, where we just go, it's not going to happen. I'm going to try and I'm going to fail. Or subconsciously, I am going to make myself fail. Is a self fulfilling prophecy the same as self sabotage, or are they a little bit different?
I think it's similar in the sense that your mindset matters. A self fulfilling prophecy might be focused more on your thought process, whereas self sabotaging might be focused more on the actions that you do to actually hurt yourself. So, a self fulfilling prophecy is starting off by saying, I don't think I can do this. I mean, that thought process alone is going to be 90% of whether or not you achieve what you're moving towards because you already
Mm.
think you can't do it. You've already set yourself up for failure in believing that you can't, believing that you're unable, believing that you're going to face things that are going to prevent you from accomplishing your goal. My next question to you, though, would be why do you believe that? What things in life have hurt you, wounded you, impacted you to the place where that is your default thought processes? How
Mm.
can you go back and heal some of those things, face some of those things in order to begin to shift that mentality? We have to really take ownership of our thoughts. We got to own our junk. One of the practices in reset is literally own your junk. And I think it's hard for us to acknowledge that we have junk, that we have
Yeah.
stuff that we have to own, that we have things that are keeping us back. But I also think it's freeing and empowering to know that in that case, we have the key to living the life that we want to live by God's grace. Like we have that power and authority to be able to live life in the way that we want to live. And there's nobody that can impact that more than ourselves.
Yeah. How would you encourage somebody to decide to pursue health? Because when we talk about the idea of even getting therapy or just starting to ask some of the deeper questions, I know that there's some people who won't want to do it because if you imagine, our life like a series of puzzle pieces, it's like even if some of the pieces don't fit together properly, they've kind of jammed them together. You've got a picture there, and it's like, don't ask a question, or one of the pieces may fall apart and everything will fall apart. For the person
Yeah.
who's kind of afraid of unraveling their life, feeling like it might just all fall apart, and what am I going to do with that? How would you encourage them to do this work and see the benefits of what could be on the other side of it?
Well, the other day on Instagram, I kind of responded to this very topic because I hear from a lot of people who are like, Deborah, the work of healing is hard. And my response is the work of healing is hard, but the work of staying the same and living with these wounds that begin to infect your life, your family, your friendships, your career, your ministry is even harder. And at the end of the day, both things are hard. You get to choose which hard you want to live, and you get to choose which one you deem is harder. I personally think it is harder to live with wounds that are beginning to infect every other area of our life and keep us down and keep us stuck and keep us from succeeding and doing all that God has called us to do. So, yeah, it's hard. Just like working out is hard. You don't become a bodybuilder overnight. You don't have muscles overnight. You don't go
Yeah.
to the gym and start lifting a 100-pound dumbbell. It is a process of doing little, tiny, hard things
Mm.
that add up to a better long-term life. And I truly believe that is less hard than living unhealed.
And there's a freedom in it. Like straight away, the scripture that you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. That comes to mind immediately because I think truth can be a hard thing to face, but it's going to set you free. And how good is that going to feel?
I agree. And I also think when we look at God's word, it talks about living an abundant life. I think many of us are so far from that, we don't even believe we can. We're like living a
Mm.
surviving life, not an abundant life. We're barely making it, barely hanging on. I don't believe that that's God's best for us. I do believe that we can live abundantly. Doesn't mean everything's going to go amazing and perfect here on this earth. We will go through hard things,
Yeah.
but we can still go through them with peace, and we can still go through them with in a life of abundance and contentment if
Mm.
we are healthy. No matter what's going on around us, it will not affect what's going on inside of us.
Yeah. And that is such an important distinction, right? That getting healthy doesn't mean we won't face challenges, but we'll just go through those challenges in a really healthy way, right? We'll go through them in a way that isn't going to damage us. When we get a knock, we know how to process it and still step forward.
Yes, and I think the healthier you are, the healthier you can rebound, the faster you rebound from those hard things. It doesn't mean those hard things aren't going to come,
Mm.
but they are not going to paralyze you. They are going to set you back, but then you get back up and your rebound is much faster. So there's so many rewards to living in an abundant way, living in the way that God calls us to live, being the best and the healthiest we can be. It's not just for us, it's for everybody around us.
Mm. There is a an idea that you have shared a few times on socials that I have always reposted when you say it because it just resonates so much with me, and I feel like, we spoke a couple moments ago about seeing in other people's lives where you're like, you need to do this work. If you did this, oh my gosh, like you can see the enlightenment that other people need to have. And that is this idea that people will choose familiar over healthy, right? Like that they'll go back to maybe a familiar pattern of doing things as opposed to the one that's going to bring richness to their lives. If you've realized that for yourself, right? That, oh my gosh, I keep returning to this type of relationship, or I keep thinking these things about myself. How do we overcome our propensity to default to the familiar and not the healthy?
Well, first of all, I think we have to step back and recognize what's actually familiar because sometimes it's just so familiar. It's just on replay. It's just how your life is that you just assume it is what it is. This is how it's going to be. You don't even recognize the difference. Sometimes I get in the car and my kids have their music playing from the time we were in the car before, but this time the kids aren't with me. But
Mm.
I tune out the music and I'm driving for like half an hour and then I realize, wait, why am I listening to this? I could be listening to whatever I want because it's become so familiar that I've tuned it out. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to have that awareness to think about, okay, listen, what is familiar to me? Maybe these unhealthy, toxic relationships are what I've considered to be the norm. Maybe addictions are so familiar to me that now I don't even think that I can be free from them. Maybe this negative thinking has been in my life for so long that I just believe this is a part of who I am. I think it starts with us being objective and starting to recognize what is actually familiar and where are those familiar places unhealthy or toxic or
Mm.
bad for our lives so that we can begin to face some of those things. We kind of have to step back and look at our lives through a more objective lens. And this is where the help of a licensed professional counselor can be so important. Sometimes you're so ingrained in it that you don't even recognize it until someone's like, wait a second, I don't think that's actually healthy. Why do you do it this way? Why do you think about it this way? Why do you engage with people in this way? And start to kind of call you out a little bit. That's why I think community is healthy.
Yeah.
Healthy people who can call you out. The body of Christ, the church is important. There's just so many different ways that we can surround ourselves with a more objective perspective and then begin to make those changes.
Yeah, and you expand on all of these ideas in your book Reset, which we have been chatting about. Deborah, again, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you. I love the ideas and just the simplicity you bring to some of life's big concepts that really bring so much life change. And I want to ask you as we wrap it up, this podcast, it's all about being undistracted, living our lives intentionally, building them around our passions and purpose. What would be your advice to somebody who's wanting to get to that point where they truly feel like the noise of the world, my inner noise is no longer controlling me? I am focused, I am undistracted. What would your piece of advice be for people to get there?
I think it starts with what you expect for this coming year. I want to really ask you to address your expectations. Do you really believe that this can be the year of healing? Do you really believe that this can be the year that you live undistractedly? Do you really believe that this can be the year where you begin to do things differently? Because your belief and your expectations are going to set the foundation of what you're going to do this coming year. And I truly believe for me and for many others, 2020 on has been a really hard and rocky, distracting few years for many people. But I am really believing that this is going to be the year of healing. And I challenge you, do you actually believe that? Do you receive that in your life? Can you change and shift your expectations and then begin looking for different things and doing things differently? And
Mm.
if the answer to that is yes, then you're already on the right track.
Sign me up. I'm ready. Let's do it. Debra, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.